If you are unsure, if you are trying to make this jump, everybody's journey is going to look a little bit different. But if I can give any general advice before I tell you the specifics of what I did, it's trust the process and just do the next indicated step. So what's the thing that is right in front of you? Because it's so overwhelming to think about, there's this dream that I have or this thing that I want to do, and I'm here, and that feels like it's a million miles down the line. And if you try to figure out the whole plan at once, it feels impossible. So what's the thing that will get you one step closer? What can you do today?
Welcome to the Birth Education Center podcast, hosted by myself, Care Messer, an entrepreneur, birth educator, and doula. My team and I want to help you discover your options in birth and postpartum, how to find your voice, and how to use that voice to navigate our maternal healthcare system. You and your baby are not just a number. This information includes doulas too. Now let's get started. I have a great show for you today. It's kind of a mentoring call. We have a senior doula that has something in common with a younger doula. And I think what is going to transpire today is really going to help get more people into the doula world that are intimidated by not having had kids previously before they come into birth work, or have only had losses. And that's very intimidating as you come into birth work because you're helping women give birth over and over. I think that holds a lot of people back. I get phone calls of that every single week of, I want to do birth work, but I'm 20. I want to do birth work, but I'm 26. I've never been married. I don't have any kids. I don't know if I'll relate. And you will relate. And it's the whole purpose of this show today. I want to introduce Ellie Feroah today. If you have heard of Birth Kweens, which I know you have, and if you haven't listened to that, you should probably go listen to all 3 years worth before you come back to this podcast. She's amazing. She's funny. And I've known her since the very beginning of when she started doing birth work. I'm going to have her introduce herself in a bit. And I also have Ellie Oberg here, who came through our program a year ago, probably. And we've been working really closely ever since. And Ellie is also without children at this point in her life. Let's start with Ellie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Care. As you mentioned, my name's Ellie Feroah, and I started working as a doula 11 years. I should have calculated this before I got on this call, but 10 or 11 years ago, 10, I think, because my first birth was in June of 2013. And at that point, I was 23, I think, 22, 23. I didn't have kids. I still don't have kids yet. So my entire doula career has been without a family. And it's definitely something that I definitely was nervous about at first, but it's actually been an asset in a lot of ways. So I'm really excited to talk to everybody about this and just offer some encouragement, because I think childless doulas have a lot to offer. We have a place in the community. So I'm excited to be here today.
And you do have a plant family, because I've watched you nurture plants for a very long time. So those plant babies count.
I do,
cats count.
Yeah. I have a cat, and I will say that I have been in nursing school the past 2.5 years, and the plants are mostly dead. If I'm going to be really honest with you guys today, the plants are gone. But you know what? It's been a busy couple of years. So being a doula, go work in nursing school.
I'm glad that you're saying it's not my kids that are dead. So.
Yeah, just the plants. We can get new plants.
Just the plants. We can totally do that. Ellie, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are, etc.?
Awesome. Thank you again, Care, for having me. I'm super excited to talk about this topic because Ellie was saying, I feel like this is part of my soapbox topic, but backpedaling, my name is Ellie Oberg, and I am also a childless doula.
I like it. Short, simple, childless doula. And that sounds like such a depressing name, but it's really not. That actually means I am a freedom-bound doula. That's what that actually stands for. Ellie, start by telling, I know when I met you, but start by telling where you were when you first came into birth work, why you came into birth work, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I graduated college and I was 21, I think, and I got another job in the health and wellness realm doing some coaching. And around that same time, I was before I found that job, I was sitting on my couch watching Netflix, looking for a job and just eating. That was my full-time work. And I happened to stumble across that documentary, The Business of Being Born. And just for context, I was the kid who would pass out and throw up when I got my blood drawn. I accidentally saw my mom give birth when I was 14 because she's just like like she was being induced and she had an epidural, and the woman like almost had one of her babies on the freeway. Like, she's very efficient. And I was in the room and I was like, well, this like not for me. I like left my body. I vividly remember being in the corner of this hospital room, like, oh my God, why can't, this is like a scene from Alien v Predator. There's like a person coming out of like, I was so overwhelming. So a very squeamish, the medical field was like the last thing I was headed toward, just for context. So if anybody is, I don't know if I can handle the sights and the smells and the blood, you might not be able to, but you might. And for me, it was something that like I grew out of. And now there's a few things that get me. I've learned through the process of nursing school, mostly, where I'm like, can't do phlegm. It's a no for me, but I could wipe your butt while I eat a cheeseburger, and like, it doesn't bother me. So you can grow out of this stuff. It's good news. But I found that other job and I watched that documentary and I was like, oh my God, why is no one talking about this? Why, like, starting to understand the way that we are treated and our babies are treated through pregnancy and through birth matters so much. And it just seems like, why is this country spending more money than any other industrialized nation on women's health and birth and maternity care? And we have the worst outcomes. And so I picked up a book by one of the midwives that was interviewed in that documentary and went to Barnes & Noble and sat on the floor and read it there instead of buying it, because again, I did not have a job. And eventually I bought all those books, but that was my start. I was just like, oh my God, I was captivated by it. And it was probably a year and a half or 2 years from that point of kind of initially it piquing my interest before I ever stepped foot in a birth room. And I'm really grateful for that, because I spent those couple of years like reading and learning and reading every book, finding every documentary, videos on YouTube's, like just eating it up. And then eventually I took like a proper doula training and it formalized the education. But for me, going in as a 23-year-old childless, like I look back and I'm like, I can't believe anyone ever hired me. Like, wild. But I had spent so many years gathering information that I felt really confident in a solid knowledge base, and in the fact that I could tell my clients or potential clients that, especially when I was new, I would say, hey, nobody knows everything. There's, plenty of things that I don't know yet or that I haven't learned or haven't experienced, but what I have is a really solid community behind me. So if there is a question that I don't have the answer to, I know who to call and who to ask. So you're hiring me, but you're also hiring the support of the doula community that I have supporting me and behind me, which we're so lucky in San Diego. It was wonderful. And Kara, you were, of course, a huge part of that. I should step off my soapbox, but that, I spent those couple of years learning. And then when I went into my first birth, it was still very overwhelming and very intense of like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. It's so different when something goes from like the pages of a book or a video screen to real life. But I had some knowledge to rely on, it helped a lot.
And that was actually your second birth, technically.
Yeah, if you count the one that I dissociated for at the age of 14, it was birth number 2. It was the one that I was in my body for, the first one.
Okay, so the first one incarnate was the one here in San Diego.
Yep, exactly.
Oh, so funny. So after that first birth, what do you think helped with that confidence level? Was it because you had all the education and you were like, oh my gosh, I just did this? Or I actually got through it without throwing up, with smelling things and seeing things?
Yeah, for the thing that I think has helped the most, and this goes for learning to be a doula, but also in every other thing that I take on, any new thing that I'm trying to learn, is I try to gather information and then you just learn by doing. And so I tried to enter every birth, and even now, even 10 years and 300 plus births later, with a humble spirit and like being open to learn from this new family, from this new baby. Every birth is different. Every family is different. Just really going in, I would always try to set that intention of, okay, I want to be here and be present for these people and in this space as they need me to be. And my little petition to the universe was like, help me show up as I'm needed today. And that might not work for everybody, but for me, and my pattern is before I do something, I'm like, oh my God, I can't do it. I don't know. I'm like panicking up here. It's like, and usually on the outside, I'm like, this is fine. It's like the duck feet under the water. But as soon as I would walk in to that birth room, I would really make sure to take some deep breaths. And even if it was like I was moving fast and I needed to go fast, take 15 or 30 seconds and calm my body, take some deep breaths, because the energy that we walk into that birth space with is so powerful. And that's, I think, one of the biggest things I can impart on new doulas, childless or not, any doula, is really understand that and be conscious of what you are bringing in there with you. What fears, what baggage. It's hard when you have your own life and a lot of other stuff is going on. But when you walk through those doors, it doesn't matter. This is this baby's only chance to be born. And it's our responsibility to show up for them in the way that they're needed. So, settle myself before I walk through those doors. And then once I'm there and once I'm in the flow, it's so much easier to meet people where they're at and figure out, okay, what's going on in front of me? What does this family seem to need? Are they afraid? Are they overwhelmed? Are they in a groove and I should just step back and let them do their thing? And so gather knowledge and then trust yourself, trust your gut just to read the situation and learn as you go. It's the only way to do it, I think.
And I think that we also forget that male OBs have never had a baby in their life. And we go to them for all of our care.
And nobody would ever ask if they have a baby, ever.
Nope.
Doesn't matter.
And I've been with midwives that have never had babies before. They're amazing midwives. They just look at that as a care provider. They don't even think about it. So I always wonder, like, why are we caring that we don't have that experience as we're walking in? Because a lot of the people don't have that experience. Mm-hmm. No one's questioning that. Could be a male patriarchal thing too. That's the bullshit we have. But
yeah, I bet female OBs get asked that more than men.
Yeah, it all plays into almost the imposter syndrome that we come in with, but it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. We all know how to support people when they're sick, when they're not feeling well. That's all it is. Just like you said, you're meeting them in the moment, assessing the environment as you walk in, and then literally trusting yourself. And Ellie, I know that you have really relied on community in not only in Texas, but here. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like how that has helped you as a newer doula, childless or not?
Yeah, for sure. So I think I always say I couldn't have done this without community. So my first birth experience was a little bit different. I didn't know anything about birth when I attended my first one. It was something that I was interested in. And my next door neighbor at the time had been a doula for years. And she actually was interested in becoming a doula at 15 and took her training at 16 with DONA because that's as early as they would let her take it. And so it was a couple years later and she was about 20. And so she'd been doing this for 4 years, still being very young. And she didn't have kids either. And so I just approached her and I was like, hey, can you tell me about this? And she was like, you know what? Do you want to just come with me to a birth? And I was like, I guess. I didn't really know what that meant. I was just excited to explore this new revenue. And I remember the moment it happened.
I didn't know what that meant. No,
I had no idea. And she had told me, she was like, I have this perfect mom who would love for you to shadow. Fourth time mom, birth center birth. And I hadn't watched anything. I think I watched one person give birth on live. And that was my spark. But that was it. I had not read anything. I had not seen anything. And I remember I had packed my little bag and packed all my food because I was like, oh yeah, it's going to take forever. Little did I know, fourth time mom, she texts me. And so we hop in the car, we ride together, which is just, I don't know, the strength of community in that moment of just riding with another doula. I just feel like it's unmatched when you get to work with other doulas. It's just the sense of we're in this together. Even though I was shadowing her, I played a really active role. And I left that birth just like wide-eyed, ready to attend all of them. And it also helps that I was there for about 30 minutes before the baby was born. Baby was almost born in the stairway up. It was like a planned water birth, but no time to fill the tub. I mean, all of the midwives are looking at me and my mentor at the time being like, don't you start thinking that this job is how this is. This is not usually how this goes. They kept saying, she's a unicorn. Do not think that this is what your job is like, because we'd all take 8 clients a month if they were all like her. So it was a really nice, slow introduction to birth, because eventually 4 or 5 births down the road, I would get humbled a little bit. But yeah, I just having that community there being like, hey, when I was in your place, nobody really took me in. I was younger, don't have kids, and I'm going to be that for you because I know how important it is and I know how much I needed that. And so having her support and her guidance, especially in the beginning, and right after that, I did take a doula training while I continued to shadow with her. But yeah, without attending that first birth and having somebody to be like, hey, I've got you. I know what you're feeling, was just incredible. And then going even further, moving across the country as a new doula without kids, I couldn't have done it without community, because you have to have people not only to rely on personally, but to refer you. I moved out here to do this full time, and it has not been easy. And I couldn't have done it without the support of the strong community here. That's part of the reason why I moved out here.
And that brings us to a really good question, because Ellie, I remember picking you up at your coaching job 11 years ago. God, that's like a long time ago. I look just as good as I did 11 years ago.
I don't.
Yeah. And I'm being very facetious. And I remember picking you up, I think, for a doula circle. And you needed to transition from this coaching into making doula your full-time gig. So can you tell me a little bit about how you started figuring that out so that you could replace that income as full-time income? Because I wasn't even a full-time doula at that point. I was an educator and did 2 births a month, occasionally 3.
Yeah.
And so I know that was a big transition, and that's right where Ellie is right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big jump. And I worked that other job for 2.5-ish years. And most of that time, I was also doing some form of birth work. And so what that looked like for me at first was I started volunteering at a birth center that was local. And I didn't at the time, I think like a lot of young doulas, I wasn't married. There was no other income source. So it was like, figure it out. And, which I'm so grateful for. And still, when I look back, I'm like, I can't believe I figured that out. Like, it's incredible. I can't believe all this has worked out. And truly, like, if you are unsure, if you are trying to make this jump, everybody's journey is going to look a little bit different. But if I can give any like general advice before I tell you the specifics of what I did, it's that trust the process and just do the next indicated step. So what's the thing that is right in front of you? Because it's so overwhelming to think about, like, there's this dream that I have or this thing that I want to do, and I'm here, and that feels like it's a million miles down the line. And if you try to figure out the whole plan at once, it feels impossible. So what's the thing that will get you one step closer? What can you do today? Mine was I found out about this volunteer doula program and got connected with that. And I just started signing up for every shift that I could. And for me, that was like every weekend, because I had the 9-to-5 corporate job. I couldn't, like, being on call was not that I had like people knocking down my doors as a 22-year-old with no experience, but I couldn't do it at that point. So the great thing about the volunteer program was that I could pick when I was on call and had some control. We never know how long it's going to take for a baby to be born, but that's how I started getting experience. And so I think it was my first 5 to 10 births were through that. And then I signed up to sit in on a childbirth education class, and I took a low cost doula client through them. And that was like my first time being on call. My first handful of births were all first time moms or prime-ups. And The first time I saw a multip who had given birth vaginally before, like I was almost the reason this woman had her baby in the side of the road. Cause I was just like, I'll meet you at your house. You live 40 minutes from the hospital. No problem. Let me come there for you. But you don't know what you don't know. And in the mentorship thing is so important because what I started doing after those experiences is like talking things through with people like Care and other experienced doulas in the community was like, okay, here's some like basic details, like what are things that are coming up for you or what might you consider and then sometimes you learn the hard way because the baby does come out in the back of the car and there's just nothing you can do about that. But
that's it.
Pull over. It's fine. But it was like probably a year and a half into that 2.5-ish years of doing both where I wanted to make the jump so bad. And I'm like not a big risk taker in general. So I have to get so uncomfortable that I'm like, the only thing scarier than like making this big leap is continuing to do the thing I'm doing. And that's kind of what happened for me. Like I felt like all these signs from the universe. Like I had some midwives start referring people to me and some friends were like, oh, you should hire Allie, whatever. So I think I had 4 or 5 clients lined up and was just at this point, I was sitting at my desk and I had this moment of clarity, which normally I am like an anxiety ridden, indecisive, like, I don't know, what if this, what if that? Like, so when I tell you that this moment where I was like, I'm done. And I wrote my resignation email right then. So that's what it looked like for me. That's not what it looks like for everybody. And that's okay. It was a very incremental transition. And then it was like, okay, dive in with 2 feet. And it worked. And I was a full-time doula for probably about 8 years. And the only reason I'm not anymore is, like I said, I decided to go to nursing school and that just limited my time. But yeah, it was exciting. And I feel like I made that leap and our doula community was there to catch me. And I am just forever grateful for that. And it doesn't have to be a huge group of people. If that's not what you have in your community, a handful, a small network of support is incredible.
And just the fact that, because I remember when you finally were like, I'm quitting, and you went from 4 or 5 to then solid 4 a month at least. And you had things dialed in. And for those of you who don't know, and we're talking about primips or first time moms usually take a little bit longer because the body's never done it before. But second time babies, the vagina is like a trap door. It just all of a sudden goes 0 to 10 and we have a baby. We love second time moms because they're so fast. Third time, that's a crapshoot. We never really know what's going to happen on those third timers. But second times, we can pretty much guarantee that's going to be a slam dunk easy. But I remember that transition and you going, I don't know if I can do this. And I think it was seamless because you put in the work ahead of time on those weekends and building community and attending events and getting educated because all of that networking does a lot to get you to your goal. And it is overwhelming if you look at the big picture, like, how am I going to do this? But very good advice to just be like, one thing at a time, what's working? How do I get to where I'm going? Because it doesn't have to be an overnight transition. And there's a doula that I know in town that's doing the same thing. She works her 9 to 5, but anything on the weekends, she's backup for anybody. And because she wants to be able to switch into that. And so as soon as her husband gets the right kind of insurance for their family, she's out. So yeah, I love how that works. Huge. Ellie, do you have any questions about that?
Yeah. Allie, I did want to ask, in terms of having a full-time job, how did you approach that situation or conversation with clients, like regarding availability?
Absolutely. It's definitely a balancing act in the beginning when you have another job, but it's also a balancing act when you're a full-time doula because you're always on call for other people. What I would tell them is I had some friends or that little community I was telling you about early on. I started networking to find backups because even if you take one client a month and this is your full-time job and you don't have kids and you feel like I'm 100% available, life happens and you can get sick or there's an emergency. So that's a huge thing to cultivate early on. And a reason to cultivate community is because you need people to call on. And so I would just talk with them about backup availability, that, hey, these are the people that I rely on. And because I was taking like one scheduled client a month, those first few months where I was taking on private clients that weren't volunteer based, but I was still working, I would just call out of work. Like I just saved up my vacation days and I would call out of work. And I never wanted to do that, and I'm very much not a proponent of I'm a rule follower and we don't want to take advantage. But here's the reality. I had a job that I worked for a big corporation. Nobody was going to miss me when I was gone. Do you know what I mean? One of those, these companies don't love you back. So do good work, be a good employee, but also I earned that vacation. So I would take it, or that PTO or whatever. And I will tell you, it got to the point where, because I didn't like calling out, I felt bad. I didn't want to lie that I was sick. And that was part of what really pushed me to okay, I just need to take this plunge and quit and go full time. Because that moment I was telling you about, where I was sitting at my desk and was like, I'm done with this. I had 3 or 4 births lined up. And I was like, oh no, how am I going to do this? What am I just going to not go to work this month? I can't, yeah. I have to stop.
I'm calling out of work 3 times this month. You started to correlate those 2 things, I'm sure. It was every client, it was okay, I'm looking at one PTO day, and it's okay, I've got 5 now. Let's look at how many days I have.
Yes. Yeah. Or the company policy on if you call out this many times, you're going to get written up, and I don't like to get written up. So yeah, it was one of the things that helped push me, and I'm so glad it did.
I remember saying that in interviews. When you hire me, you're literally hiring a fleet of doulas. Because in the middle of the night, if I can't think straight, I can get on Facebook, and everybody else who's at a birth that happens to have somebody sleeping, or they're in between, they're taking their break or whatever, can get back to me with all the things that I forgot, or that I'm not clearly thinking about, or that I need help or answers with, or I'm working with this provider, any tips. It really is that way. And we are lucky in San Diego to have that kind of group. But now with the internet being the way it is, there are nationwide groups and worldwide groups that somebody's always awake and somebody's always paying attention. And when I see all that information come in, I'm like, oh my gosh, she's got exactly what she needs in those things to start with. So it really is, building community is number one, and also getting educated. I love that you really spent those weekends getting educated and doing volunteer births, because everyone is building your confidence. So this is what I really want the listeners to know. We do a lot of interview training and different scenarios so that people get really well versed in what could come up in an interview. And this goes for Ellie or Allie. What has come up as questions about your stature of no children in interviews?
Yeah.
Ellie.
Do you want to answer first, Ellie? I'm curious about your experience.
Yeah, honestly, a lot of times it does not come up. It's just not something that I typically disclose to people, and they can just find that out on their own. Sometimes it's something that might come up in a prenatal. There's only been one experience where somebody's been like, I really want to hire you, but it's really bothering me that you don't have kids. And I'm like, awesome, hire somebody else. I let it roll off my back, because I'm if you're really stuck on this thing, we're not going to mesh. This is not going to be a good connection. You're just consistently going to be viewing me as lesser of experience. And that's not something you want to be thinking about in the birth room. So please hire somebody with kids if that is so deeply on your mind. And I think the biggest thing is, I'm an open book. I answer any and all questions people have, but I also know that I am not everyone's doula. And I don't want everyone to hire me. Having that mindset,
yes.
It's easier for me to answer any and all questions without feeling this burden of oh, well, I have to answer it right so that they hire me. My answer, whether in terms that they hire me, I want that to determine whether they hire me or not, even if it's because I have an answer that they don't resonate with.
That's a really mature answer, to be if that is going to hang you up during a birth, then the connection's not going to be there. And 100% you are right. Because if they feel that is a drawback for them to be able for you to relate to their experience, you're exactly right. That is going to be a hang up, and that's okay. That's just not a connection for us right now. So beautiful answer and response to that, because it's exactly right.
My experience is very similar. I had one person in 10-ish years and hundreds of interviews that told me after, you were great. I really liked you, but you don't have kids, and that doesn't feel like the right thing for me, or that's a deal breaker. And I was like, great, that is totally fine. And you know what? I'm sure there were other people who that maybe was the reason they didn't hire me, but it really, like, it absolutely, and I got more confident in this over the years. My not having kids, like, took nothing away from what I was able to provide and what I am able to provide to clients. And there is so much value that somebody who's had their own birth or birth experience or experiences that they can bring to the birth room. But I will say, on the flip side of that, I have no hangups. I have no expectations about what happened in my own birth or anything that went on for me. I have nothing that I'm walking in there with. So from my own personal experience, and there's something really valuable about that. And there is also something really valuable about, I've never had to think about childcare or anything when somebody needs me, or, and listen, every doula friend I have, I think, has kids, and they are incredible, and they figure it out, and they're reliable, and you guys are all superheroes. And so don't not hire a doula with kids because of that. They figure it out. But it's one other thing that was never on my mental list. And like, when I got home from a birth, I could go and like get in the shower and eat my piece of pizza while I'm hanging out of the shower, because I'm such a shell of a person, and eat and shower at the same time. So I could go straight to bed and recharge, and I didn't have to contend with anything else. And so there are, for those of you who don't have kids and you want to be a doula, there are huge benefits. There are, it makes this job easier in so many ways.
It absolutely does. And I remember that sometimes you would come home from a birth, because I'd go pick up a placenta at your house because you'd bring it home for me.
Yeah.
And you don't have that mental load of thinking, then I still have to get home by 6:00 and get my kids ready for school and take them and all of that. You don't have that. And I'm like, God bless you for not having to worry about that. It really is a huge advantage. Yeah. And I think a lot of times we also aren't thinking as parents, when we walk into our birth at a hospital, we don't even know if the nurses on L&D have ever had babies. And we aren't asking them that. Like, why can't we just go into birth as, we're going to support you through this, and not even think about it? Because there could be, being in nursing school, there are a lot of no children providers that nobody even questions or even asks. It's their experience and their compassion. And that's what we're going for. It really is a personality fit. And that we shouldn't let that hang us up, because we are in tune with rising to the occasion when somebody needs us. We just are. Even if we don't know what we're doing, we figure it out with them. So I hope we really
go with your gut. And it's just how you feel with a person. It's so important.
And you guys have both given such good advice today. I would like, can you each come up with something that you would give advice for parents when they are hiring a doula that doesn't have kids? And then also, like, your best piece of advice for the doulas that are thinking of coming into birth work, but they're intimidated by that, or the ones that are already in it and still hesitant to just jump in with both feet.
Yeah, good questions. Advice for parents, I would say, do your research on the person and take into account their experience and their education, but also pay close attention to how you feel when you are with that person and when you're interviewing them. And what does your gut say? Can you see this person being with you in arguably the most intimate, vulnerable, one of the most important days of your life? Can you see this person being there with you? And then for doulas, who are, childless people that are trying to get into this, I think I'll just go back to, like, get educated, learn as much as you can, because that is the thing that will give you a foundation to jump in. And once you have that, find that community and rely on those around you as you get your footing. And then years down the line, you're going to be able to give that to somebody else. And it, just like the person who mentored Ellie, God, so valuable to be able to take someone in under your wing and guide them. And so you can do it.
Yeah, I think for parents, if it's a genuine question, don't be afraid to ask questions, but also don't be afraid of true answers. And then just also focus on the connection piece. I don't know, I feel like that's like my buzzword of all time is like connection, but connection. But yeah, and then as for other doulas, especially from my experiences, find a mentor or even a peer that you can relate to. Find another person who's interested in birth work, who's also childless, because they're out there, and especially in the day of social media, you can find anyone you could ever possibly want in this entire world to talk to. And so find connection with people who are in the same experience as you, who you can sit down and have a phone call with and say, hey, my one family that I'm going to have in 10 years just told me they won't hire me because I don't have kids. So I feel like we all have to have one, but have somebody there who can be like, yeah, I had mine last week.
Well, I appreciate both of you coming today and talking about this, because we want new doulas, fresh doulas, new energy in the birth space all the time. And I don't want this to be a hang up or an intimidation factor, because there's way more intimidation factors in being a doula than this.
There's so many other things to worry about, you guys. This isn't it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you want to worry about things, we can give you a list, because there's a lot. But this is definitely not it. So bottom line, come in, find your community, find mentorship, get educated. And if you are transitioning into full-time work with this, find those pockets and moments where you can support families so that you get more training, more education, and the experience, so that when you do transition in, you can jump in with both feet, because it is a job and it's a beautiful career, and we want you here. So thank you, Ellie and Allie, for being here today.
Thank you. It was so wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. And remember, it's your body, your choice, and finding your voice is your power. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us in all the places, and go to birtheducationcenter.com for our blog and more online education classes. And we'll see you next week.